Dearly redheaded, we are choosing consciousness today to get through this thing called grief. Interesting word, grief. It means love, which makes for a mighty good joke. But I'm here to tell you, there's nothing else. Just joy. And if the big picture tends to bring you down, go crazy once your life goes. Woo!
Good morning. This is
Good morning, Joanne.
Oh, well, let me introduce the podcast first. Good morning. This is your natural born redhead. I have the pleasure of being with Melanie Diotte this morning. She and I met over the phone after I read an article she wrote about estrangement several weeks ago. I contacted her in Montreal. And as a result of our conversations, we're here to speak with you folks today. Melanie, hello.
Good morning, Joanne. How are you today?
I'm very well, very well. And you?
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. So I stalked you on Facebook because of the article you wrote. But before we go there, could you just please discuss your background?
Yeah, so I'm a 53-year-old proud mother of three, ages 19, 24, 25. I have spent over 35 years in the recruitment and staffing industry, including 25 of those years owning and operating my own recruitment agency here in Montreal, Canada. Still do a lot of recruiting today, but true passion is coaching, both life coaching and career coaching, just helping people navigate their careers, improving themselves, and find confidence in the workplace and life in general. And what led me to do life coaching is that in March of 2020, the start of COVID, I lost my late spouse after an 8-month battle of pancreatic cancer. And at the same time, COVID had shut down my business completely, the recruitment business, right? Companies were shutting down their offices, going home. It was chaos. Nobody knew what to do. So my business had shut down. I was grieving, but I knew as a single mom of three, I also had to figure out how to pay bills. I knew I had to reinvent myself. I didn't know when, the recruitment business was going to pick back up, if ever. So I became a certified life coach, literally from my bed while grieving. So over the past 5 years, I've been growing that while doing my recruitment. That part of my work has grown tremendously. So I help job seekers find jobs, create resumes, tell their story, coach executives through personal development, help with mock interviews, and then again support employers recruiting top talent. So that's a little bit about me, Joanne.
Fantastic. And I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
What I'm going to do first is discuss, again, your article that came to me was through a Kind Souls page on Facebook where you had written about multi-generational trauma and estrangement. So before we go there, and I'll share your article, I want to talk about the different generations that we're experiencing today, meaning that are alive and well and participating in both the history of trauma and the contribution to estrangement. Okay? So the one that I'm going to mention first is the generation that both my parents were from, the greatest generation, born between 1901 and 1927. My father was 24, my mother was 27. I just lost my mom a year ago. The reason I mention them is when you and I spoke, we spoke about the silent generation, born between 28 and 45. And because my parents were on the cusp, I want to talk more about the silent generation because there are more silent generation people living than greatest generation. What are your comments on the silent generation? And then I'll make mine.
Well, essentially, the silent generation to me lives through the biggest hardships, war hardships. When I think silent generation, I think toughness, discipline were the tools that they had. Sometimes that meant harsh, even abusive parenting. But again, I don't think they didn't have the emotional tools to discipline. So often discipline was mistaken for like good parenting, right? And I guess I'm Gen X, but my parents had me very, very young. So my parents weren't from the silent generation. My parents were boomers. Just had a conversation with my partner this morning because he's a Gen X, just a little bit older than I am, but he's on the cusp of Gen X and boomer, and I'm a true Gen X. And he said it's what's interesting is, my parents went to war and came here and immigrated with $3 in their pockets, and your parents basically smoked weed and went to Woodstock, right? So that's the difference between our parents. I'm like, wow, that's a really good comparison.
Yeah. I found I was the very youngest of six. Silent generation often had many children. In my case, all my siblings are boomers except for myself, and I'm a Gen X. So in observing the silent generation, my mother, her siblings, other people of the same age group, I found them to be very the women basically fawned the men, and the men were, not all angry and aggressive, but they had reason to be, whether it was PTSD from the war or just being overwhelmed with family. I also want to make note that generation also held grudges, and it might be because your sister borrowed a shirt and didn't return it. They were lower level grudge oriented, and I'm sure that had to do a lot with what they were tolerating. That smaller things tend to mask the larger things is kind of how I think about it. Do you agree?
Yeah, I also think that they had to work so hard for things, so they had more value in things, right?
Right. Good point. Excellent point. All right, and then the boomers get picked on a lot, but they deserve it. The
boomers do get picked on a lot. They really, really do.
Yeah, but I look at them as their hardship being that everything the silent generation fought for, the boomers had to put in place. They had to deal with the integration of school. They had to deal with feminism raging and just, and I mean that in a positive way. My definition of feminism is the potential for equality. I don't mean anything else by it. So there was a lot of, I'm sorry? You said?
I just said I understand.
Okay. So this poor group, from an empathy perspective, didn't have to fight the fights abroad, but they had to fight the fights on our own soil, if you will, within our own populations. You want to say anything else about the boomers? They tended to be more physically abused, and then repeated that abuse. And when it wasn't physical abuse, they tended to repeat emotional abuse.
I agree. I mean, the boomers who were raised by the silent generation, they often had to carry forward those lessons. I think a lot of them tried to soften things, but still lacked that emotional awareness, which sometimes made their parenting feel distant or strict. And as you said, it may not have been as physical as it was with the silent generation, but definitely distant or strict. And I recently had a interesting conversation with a friend of mine, a former client who's retired. He's 72. His mom recently passed away. She was in her 90s, and she was from the silent generation. And he said I said, well, how was your mom? How'd she treat you? And he said she was completely crazy and unhinged, and there was a lot of abuse. He said, but Melanie, she was a Holocaust survivor. She dealt with things that none of us could ever even fathom. But he always knew that she loved him. On her deathbed, and by the way, he took care of her throughout her whole life. He bought like a duplex, and she lived upstairs, and he wanted to make sure that he was close by. On her deathbed, she had dementia, and she looked at him and said, "You're my son, right?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And she said, did you eat today?" And those were her last words. And I mean, that just gutted me, right? So said, even though he used the word, my mother was unhinged, I forgave her. I loved her. And, her very last words just gave me peace.
What he needed. I not trying to make the connection now, but in a previous podcast, I linked long-term dissociation to dementia. And I think that is something at play with your story. And I think long-term dissociation and dementia are still prevalent and affects more women than men, but starting to affect men too, because men have had to disassociate from abuse as well. So
yes, they did.
So now we get the best generation. It's Gen X. I'm very opinionated about us. Give me your opinion.
Well, like you, this is my generation. I honestly think we became the sandwich generation. I think the difference between you and I is my parents were boomers and not from the silent generation, because my mother had me when she was 17, so there wasn't much of a big age difference.
Yeah,
but
I had five siblings, though. Just keep that in mind.
Wow. Yeah, I was a single child, but so we became the sandwich generation, raising kids while also caring for our aging parents.
Right.
Often no one cared about us. I feel our generation had to hold everything together, very limited support, while still trying to carry our own resolved trauma, whether our parents were boomer or silent generation.
Right. I feel that our generation, though, has enhanced empathy because of that sandwich. And as you referenced your friend, I really knew the story of my parents. I could respect that my father was in World War II, my grandfather was in World War I, and it's a very simple. It was easy for my brain to understand that, my mother lost her father when she was 11 because he was exposed to some chemical, and in the war, that when he died in the hospital, they had no idea, and they lost him at 38. Like, I was very in tune with compassion for my mother and her flaws. And my father had died, so I didn't have as much forgiving where he was concerned. My siblings had more forgiving where he was concerned. So you and I both are very compassionate, and we just see the big picture about the past and the future, what people are up against.
Yes, I understand. I forgave my parents because, as you said, we empathized, we had compassion, we understood that they went through really tough times. I mean, things that this generation, meaning millennials and Gen Z, can't even imagine.
Well, we'll get there. And you do want to say a little bit about what you forgave, or would you prefer not to? Where your parents are concerned.
I forgave that they were absent most of the time. I forgave their traumas. I know my father was emotionally and physically abused his entire childhood. I I realized he lived in extreme poverty, something that he made sure that I didn't. He may not have been, you know, active in my life and absent a lot, but I did appreciate having a nice roof over my head and new pair of shoes and making sure that, there's a meal on the table and things that he never had. So, he wasn't the perfect parent by any means, but I realized he tried much, much harder than his parents. And so I'm able to forgive him and really appreciate what he was able to give to me.
And where your mom was concerned, you want to comment or no?
I don't want to comment about her.
Okay. And if we need to edit this, we shall, but you at some point decided to become estranged from her, correct?
Correct.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Then we have the most fun generation to make fun of. Gen Y millennials, these poor kids who aren't kids. And this has kind of fallen out of the narrative. The baby boomers years ago, do you remember when they were called the Me generation?
Yes, yes. And everybody felt that the most selfish generation on the planet.
Which is unfair because of what they were up against. Integration and the isms, racism, feminism, whatever. So I get why it's kind of fallen out of the vernacular, but essentially the millennials are the Me generation's children, which is it's interesting because I find them to be an extension of the baby boomers and not the best of the boomers, like the worst of the boomers, that the cycles that were repeated. Doesn't mean there aren't great people giving it a good try, but I find the millennial men are really the first generation with truly trying to balance work and family, and they're fucking angry about it. And women are like, I'm not gonna do what Gen X women do. And they're more likely to pick a side when it comes to work or children or parents. And the parents are paying a price more so than children as a result of all that our generation carried. Would you agree?
I agree. And I also think that, our generation could be to blame for this. Right. I feel they received more intentional, emotionally conscious parenting, sometimes even too much gentle parenting. In my case, anyways, I don't know about you, Joanne, but
my kids are Gen Zs. Mine are not Gen Ys.
Yeah, mine are Gen Zs as well. So, as I said, sometimes even too much gentle parenting in reaction to what we lacked. Oh, are you okay? Are you sure you're okay? How did things go at school? Oh, somebody bullied you today? Okay, I'm going to go down to school and take care of that, make sure that never happens to you again. And I think now, in some cases, this is why they might even be too quick to cut ties with relationships when they feel too heavy, because we did everything for them, everything. And they don't know.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think it affects Gen Z more. Gen Y is more angry at their parents for the abuse or not really having. Gen X, our generation, is more emotionally evolved, even though we had our own problems, whereas the millennials were led more by the boomers than us. The millennials are their parents are right now in their 60s and early 70s, and that's a pretty wounded group. And millennials are looking at them, wishing they had done a better job emotionally. And I find that millennials are starting to face themselves in their 40s, which is better than facing yourself in your 50s.
That's right.
And we'll get to Gen Z because I love the Gen Z generation. I have a big bias for it because they're holding us accountable. Gen Z's, wants the piper paid. So I think we can go to Gen Z, and that's going to then speak in our next episode to your article. Do you want to say anything about Gen Z beyond already? I think we enabled them. I think we entitled them. I think we said, I wanted my kids to have the opportunities I didn't have, and I was raising white males, so I fell right into patriarchy and didn't know what I was doing in a sense because it was just so big in my head to produce and achieve and be successful.
Well, in my perspective, I mean, obviously the youngest generation entering adulthood now, I do give them credit for some things. They're facing some unique challenges. They have grown up in fully immersed digital life, whereas you and I, Joanne, I mean, we didn't have any of these things.
Right.
Social media, constant comparison. Many experience heightened anxiety and pressure to succeed. So a lot of these kids also experienced COVID, something that we didn't, right, and then had to go to school online. I remember my oldest daughter, she's 25, she's still Gen Z, but her first year of university was done online, and she was just gutted about this.
Yep.
She said, Mom, I don't have that university experience, right? So, to be fair, these are things that they experience. So because of that, they experience heightened anxiety, pressure to succeed. But I find that they also tend to value more being authentic, mental health awareness, more than previous generations. But, but to another level, I mean, things that we don't even understand, right, is, some of our parents, we got a beating if we said no, right? Whereas these kids are, we put a silver spoon in their mouth.
Yeah.
So when it comes to family dynamics, some may struggle with like navigating complex relationships. And again, I mean, I'm not blaming them. I'm blaming us because I think we didn't give them the tools to do this.
We didn't know.
So no, we didn't know. I certainly didn't know. So they struggle with navigating complex relationships because they're so attuned to boundaries, self-care, emotional safety, things that, I mean, I didn't even know these things existed till now. So they may also be more likely to disengage from relationships, perceive things as toxic. I mean, this will go back to my article when this woman said her mother was toxic. I'm like, well, wait a minute. What does toxic mean to you? Which I believe clashes with older generations, right? Whether it be Gen X or boomers. And ideas of duty and just being reciprocal with your parents and caring for your parents. There's definitely a clash there.
Yeah, because we were sandwiched and the resentment was starting. And we almost gave them. We could talk for days. I don't want to take away from what you just said because it's a great segue into reading your article in the next episode. What I want to end this with, because it's this is from the Indigenous Foundation, and this was written by Brianne Smith. And I know 7 generation feels like a long time, but consider this. If you were able to meet your great-grandparents, which I remember doing as a child, and you're able to meet your great-grandchildren one day, that's 7 generations right there. Your great-grandparents, your grandparents, your parents, you, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. It doesn't feel so distant when you realize that you could see 7 generations in your lifetime. The actions you take today will impact 7 generations to come. The healing, the change-making, the growth, and the generation of our land and resources will all shape the world.
Wow.
Our ancestors, even in times of hardship, made choices with the next 7 generations in mind. They thought about sovereignty and clean water, culture, and language, not for their own immediate benefit, but to ensure that we, their descendants, would have a strong foundation to stand on. This understanding reinforces that we are not separate from our history or our future. We are a continuation of both. And that's really where the generations post the silent generation have failed the future generations. And they carry the weight of that grief, which to me is unimaginable.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're in a good place to stop this episode, and we'll take a short break, and then I'll begin the next episode with your article.
Thank you for listening and supporting Natural Born Redhead. If you follow the bouncing balls, please like and subscribe. If you know someone interested in sparing others grief and inciting joy, message me on Facebook or reach out via my website, Natural Born Redhead. J-Ma.